The 17th of August, 1943. 20,000 feet above the top, German town of Schweinfurt, a formation of American B-17 bombers pushes deeper into Germany than any daylight raid has ever gone before. Their fighter Escort turned back an hour ago. There is nobody in the sky beside them now. Nobody but Luftwaffe. They are hunting for ball-bearing factories. The war planners in London believe that if these factories can be destroyed, Germany's tanks and aircraft will grind to a halt. What? The war planners do not fully understand yet that the German Air Force has been waiting for this. Waiting for the escorts to run out of fuel. Waiting for the bombers to fly alone into what the crews have started calling the killing zone. 60 B-17s will not come home. 600 American airmen will be killed, wounded, or captured in a single afternoon. The 8th Air Force is bleeding at a rate it cannot afford, and the daylight bombing campaign that was supposed to break Germany is on the edge of breaking itself instead. The problem is not the bombers. The problem is that no fighter in the world can fly far enough to protect them, and until one can, the killing zone will keep swallowing crews at a base rate that will end the campaign before it ends the war. This is the story of the Escort fighter that would change the air war forever. A plane designed in 117 days for a country that was not even its own. Almost written off after its first combat report. Then rescued by a British engine, an American factory, and one hard-nosed general who decided the escorts were done playing defense. It carried a name that in 1943 still meant almost nothing. By the end of 1944, that name would be terror in the mouths of Luftwaffe pilots, from the coast of France to the rooftops of Berlin. Its name was the North American P-51 Mustang. To understand what the Mustang changed, you have to understand what the world was. Like before it, American air doctrine going into the war was built on one confident sentence: the bomber will always get through. Fly high enough, in tight enough formations, with enough machine, guns, and the fortresses would defend themselves. Escort fighters were a nice idea, but not, the theorists insisted, a necessity. By late 1943, the theory was bleeding to death over Germany. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, the workhorse escort of the 8th Air Force, was a magnificent aircraft, heavily armed, punishingly rugged. Pilots nicknamed it the Jug and swore it could absorb hits that would tear any other fighter apart. But Thunderbolt drank fuel like a locomotive. Even with drop tanks, it could push, perhaps, 300 miles into Germany before it had to turn for home. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning could fly farther, but it had troubles of its own. In the freezing air over Europe, engine failures, cockpit heating that never worked, turning circles that put it at a disadvantage against the Messerschmitt. The Luftwaffe learned the fighter escorts range down to the minute. German controllers watched the American formations on radar, and the moment the little friends turned back, they vectored their interceptors in from every direction. Twin-engine destroyers stood off beyond machine gun range and fired rockets into the bomber boxes. Behind them came the single-engined fighters, Messerschmitt 109s and Focke-Wulf 190s, slashing through the formations at 400 miles an hour, cannon shells tearing through aluminum. The second Schweinfurt raid on the 14th of October, 1943, was worse than the first. 291 bombers took off. 60 did not come back. Another 138 limped home with damage so severe most would never fly a combat mission again. American commanders quietly suspended deep penetration raids. There was no other choice. Continue the campaign at this rate, and there would be no 8th Air Force by spring. They needed a fighter that could go anywhere the bombers could go. So far, nobody in the Allied camp had built one. The plane that would answer that problem had already been designed. It just did not know Yet that it was the answer. Go back to April 1940. Britain was fighting alone. The Battle of France was collapsing. The Battle of Britain was still weeks away, and the Royal Air Force was frantic for aircraft. A British purchasing commission arrived in the United States looking to buy every fighter they could get their hands on. They approached the Curtiss Company for more P-40s. Curtiss was already at capacity, so they turned to a smaller California firm called North American Aviation. North American's president, James Kindleberger, made an offer that most historians still find astonishing. He did not want to build P-40s under license. He wanted to design something better, and he wanted to do it in 120 days. The British were skeptical, but they were also desperate. They signed the contract. North American's chief engineer, Edgar Schmood, and a small team went to work. They designed a fighter with a laminar flow wing, a smooth, thin airfoil that dramatically reduced drag. They used a radiator arrangement so clever that the hot air pushed out the back actually gave the plane a small amount of extra thrust. The prototype, designated NA-73X, rolled out of the North American factory just 117 days after the contract was signed. No engine yet. That was still coming. But airframe was ready. It flew for the first time in October 1940. The British called it the Mustang. And, on paper, it looked like it might be the finest fighter of the war. The problem was the engine. Under the hood of the early Mustangs was an American engine called the Allison V-1710. At low altitude, the Allison was excellent. The Mustang ran rings around. The Spitfire down low, faster in a dive, faster in a straight line, and able to stay in the air longer than any single-engine fighter in service. But once you took the plane above 15,000 feet, the Allison choked. It had no two-stage supercharger, and in the thin air over Europe, it lost horsepower fast, which was a problem, because the Luftwaffe fought its battles up above 20,000 feet. The Royal Air Force flew the early Mustangs in low-level reconnaissance and ground attack roles, and they were superb at it. But nobody imagined the aircraft could be a strategic escort fighter. Its ceiling was wrong. Its engine was wrong. It was, at that point, a very good tactical fighter and nothing more, which is when a British test pilot named Ronald Harker climbed into a Mustang at Duxford Aerodrome on the 30th of April, 1942. Harker flew for Rolls-Royce, the company that built the Merlin engine, the same engine that powered the Spitfire and the Hurricane and later the Lancaster bomber. He took the Mustang up. He felt how well it handled, how smoothly it flew, how efficient the airframe was at high speeds. And he wrote a report that would rewrite the air war. "Take out the Allison," he said. "Put a Merlin in it." The suggestion sounded almost heretical. Rolls-Royce Merlins were priceless. Every Merlin off the line was already promised to another airframe. But the idea would not go away. Rolls-Royce built 5 prototype conversions with the Merlin 61, an engine with a 2-stage, 2-speed supercharger that kept its power all the way up to 40,000 feet. The result was staggering. The Merlin Mustang could hit 440 miles an hour at high altitude. It could climb like a Spitfire, and critically, unlike a Spitfire, it could keep flying for hours. With external drop tanks, the airframe's incredible efficiency turned it into something the world had never seen. A first-line fighter with the range of a bomber. The Americans licensed the design to the Packard Motor Company in Detroit, which retooled and started building Merlins by the thousand. Fitted with a Packard-built Merlin, the airplane became the P-51B, and in December 1943, it went into combat over Europe for the first time. But an aircraft is only as effective as the doctrine that flies it. And in January 1944, that doctrine changed too. On the 6th of January, 1944, a new commander took over the 8th Air Force. His name was Jimmy Doolittle, and he was already a legend, the man who had led the raid on Tokyo in April 1942, when America needed a symbol of hope more than it needed a strategic victory. One of the first things Doolittle did after taking command was walk into the office of William Kepner, the head of the 8th Fighter Command. According to the story that has come down through 8th Air Force lore, there was a sign on the wall. It read something like this: "The first duty of 8th Air Force fighters is to bring the bombers back alive." Doolittle told him to take it down. He replaced it with a new instruction. The first duty of the fighters was no longer to shepherd bombers. It was to destroy the Luftwaffe wherever they could find it, even before the German fighters had left the ground. American escort fighters had, until that moment, been tied to the bomber stream. Doolittle cut the leash. Mustangs and Thunderbolts and Lightnings were now free to sweep ahead of the bomber formations, to dive on German airfields, to hunt Luftwaffe interceptors climbing to altitude before they ever reached the bombers. It was the fighter, equivalent of switching from defense to offense, and it changed everything. The change showed in February 1944. From the 20th to the 25th of that month, the 8th and 15th Air Forces ran a series of raids that would come to be called Big Week. Ostensibly, the targets were German aircraft factories. In reality, the targets were German pilots. For 6 days, American bombers went out with Mustangs sweeping ahead of them. Every time the Luftwaffe scrambled to intercept, they ran into a wall of P-51s waiting at altitude. The Americans lost heavily too. Over 200 bombers went down that week. But the numbers on the German side were the numbers that mattered. Roughly 100 fighter pilots killed in 6 days. Veterans among them. The expertin who had been flying since the invasion of Poland. For a country running out of fuel and with no time to train new pilots, every experienced flyer was irreplaceable. Big Week did not destroy the Luftwaffe, but it broke its back. And from that week forward, the Luftwaffe would never again own the skies over its own capital. Which brings us to the 4th of March, 1944. The morning was cold and the bell visibility poor. Colonel Donald Blakesley, commanding the 4th Fighter Group, led 16 Mustangs across the German border at 28,000 feet. Some of his pilots had less than an hour of flying time in the Mustang. When they had asked about training, Blakesley had given them an answer that entered the group's folklore. You can learn to fly the 51 on the way to the target. 2 days later, on the 6th of March, 669 American bombers, escorted by hundreds of Mustangs, pushed into Berlin airspace. It was the deepest daylight raid of the war. The Luftwaffe threw everything it had at them. It was not enough. After the war, when Allied interrogators sat down with Hermann Goering, the head of the press of Luftwaffe, and asked him when he had known Germany was going to lose the air war, he did not name the Battle of Britain. He did not name Stalingrad. He said, in a phrase that has come down through history 1,000 times since, that when he saw American Mustangs escorting bombers over Berlin, he knew the war was lost. The Mustang did not just win missions, it made careers. George Preddy from Greensboro, North Carolina, flew Mustangs with the 352nd Fighter Group. By the time he was killed by friendly ground fire on Christmas Day, 1944, he had shot down 26 and 83 enemy aircraft in the air, more than any other pilot ever to fly a Mustang. Chuck Yeager, later the man who would break the sound barrier over the California desert, flew a Mustang called Glamorous Glen. He was shot down over France, evaded capture with the help of the French resistance, made it back to England and returned to combat. He would end the war with 11.5 aerial victories, 5 of them scored on a single day. Bud Anderson, another Mustang pilot in the 357th Fighter Group, flew a plane he named Old Crow. He completed 2 full combat tours without ever being hit. Not once. These pilots were extraordinary, but they were extraordinary in an aircraft that let them be extraordinary. Any competent pilot who climbed into a Merlin Mustang in the winter of 1944 knew he had the fastest, longest-legged, most graceful fighter in the bath. Sky underneath him. By the summer of 1944, the transformation was total. When Allied troops came ashore at Normandy on the 6th of June, they came ashore under skies that were effectively empty of the Luftwaffe. German fighters that tried to attack the beachhead were hunted before they could reach it. The air war in the West had already been decided in the months between Doolittle's arrival and D-Day. For the rest of the war, Mustangs escorted American bombers to every target in Europe. They flew from England to Berlin and back. They flew from Italy over the Alps into Austria and southern Germany. From bases on Iwo Jima, they escorted B-29s all the way to Tokyo, the longest single-engined fighter escort missions in the history of aerial warfare. The Mustang did not win the Second World War by itself. No aircraft did. Butte did. Something narrower and just as decisive. It shattered the doctrine that had governed strategic bombing for a decade. It proved that a fighter could fly as far as a bomber. It ended the killing zone. And by doing so, it turned the campaign that was breaking the 8th Air Force into the campaign that broke the Luftwaffe instead. Every long-range escort mission since every fighter that has shepherded strike aircraft deep into hostile airspace, from Korea to Vietnam to the deserts of Iraq, traces its lineage back to 117 days of drafting in a California engineering room and a Rolls-Royce test pilot at Duxford who thought the plane deserved a better heart. So what actually broke the Luftwaffe? Was it the Merlin engine, without which the Mustang could not have flown high enough? Was it the range from the drop tanks, without which no fighter could have reached Berlin? Or was it Jimmy Doolittle's decision to cut the escorts loose and let them hunt? Tell us in the comments below. If you found this story worth your time, please take a moment to hit the like button. It helps this channel reach more people who care about the real stories behind the aircraft of the Second World War. Next time, we cross to the other side of the front, to the Luftwaffe's last gasp answer to everything you just heard. A long-nosed Focke-Wulf that could outturn a Mustang at low altitude, built too late, and flown by pilots trained too fast to save an Air Force that was already bleeding out. Subscribe so you do not miss it. Thanks for watching.